Hello and welcome to the Unsung Sport Podcast, the podcast that takes you behind the sports you love. Today I'm joined by Hugo Scheckter, Managing Director of the Player Care Group and former Head of Player Care at West Ham United. Thanks very much for coming on.
Thanks for having me. Great to be here.
Great stuff. So before I get into player care, which I think is an absolutely fascinating topic anyway, I'd love to hear about where your passion from football came from.
Yeah, good question. I never really grew up with football. My family don't really like football and never really got into it through them. Actually, it came through the Championship Manager game as it was back then, Championship Manager 2001, 2002. One of my friends had it at school and we were very competitive gamers as the really cool kids that we were. And he would always beat me because he would know all the players and I didn't. So one summer I decided to learn all the footballers that I could, and so I could beat him on Championship Manager, and I did that. And then actually I decided I quite liked the game and got into it from there. But that was well, it's been 13, 14 years ago now. So not the conventional route. I didn't ever go to games with my family or anything like that. But yeah, through Championship Manager actually.
Yeah, it's one of those games that I lost many hours, days, weeks, probably months of my life playing as well. So I'm totally with you on that one. But coming back to kind of player care, I think it seems to be a relatively newer concept. I know that the role in clubs has grown exponentially. But you joined in 2014, so was it relatively new at that time?
Yeah, I think when I joined Southampton in 2014, I think maybe 12 or 13 clubs had got a player care person or player liaison, as it was called then. And so, yeah, we weren't really even front runners on it. We were kind of maybe mid pack on it. But yeah, I mean, now when you look back, look forward 10 years, it's changed completely. A lot of clubs have full departments of people, trying to be more proactive rather than just, reacting to things as we probably were back then, and trying to make it into a sort of an actual, I always say science is too much, but actually try and make it like an actual department that actually plans things and tries to get ahead of problems rather than just solving them. I think is where a lot of clubs are at now. But we also see that not every club has first team player care in the Premier League this season. Across Europe, it's not very prevalent across the major leagues in Europe. America's pretty close to us. Actually, MLS is pretty close to us, but it's growing, but we're not even close to sort of the crest of the wave at all, I don't think, still. So a long way to go still in terms of convincing people, convincing clubs, and really getting ahead of it, I think.
Yeah, and that's interesting you kind of mentioned there because you would assume that every Premier League club would be at that level. So it's not like a mandated role within a club. So it's very much club dependent. Is that right?
Yeah, there's no Premier League rules at all around first team player care, so it's up to clubs to do what they want, and so you see a wide variance between clubs with nobody to clubs with sort of massive departments. So in some ways that makes it easier. I mean, I guess for me as a business owner to try and use it more of a competitive advantage a little bit, but when you're talking about humans and you're talking about individual people, I think it's something that should be minimum standards, but there aren't. So we deal with the frameworks. There are mandatory requirements in the academies, but not in the first team. So it's every club does it differently. Every club does it individually, and everyone has a different approach. And every club is different, so the approaches need to be different. So yeah, I think it works okay, but certainly there's a huge room for growth on top as well.
And again, an assumption from a football fan, I think, is that, the back of you said there, is it the clubs with more international players that would have bigger teams, or is that not always the case?
Uh, yes and no. I think obviously Man City will have more than Stevenage, but that's more down to budget as well. I think all clubs need care, and I think if you've lived in Cornwall and you move to London and then you move to Newcastle, they're three very different things, even if you're British. So I don't think necessarily that probably moving between, I don't know, Berlin and London is probably as different as it is from moving from Cornwall to London. So, I don't know that it's really just about international players, but it's about, I think for me, it's about how do the clubs look at things and how do they see that actually this is in a real area that they can gain an advantage. And I think the mission it's been for me is as a business owner is to try and speak to clubs in their own language, which isn't just saying this is like a charity or a nice thing to do. It's like these are actually the ways that we can help either on the pitch or on the balance sheet that actually speaks in the club's language where they go, actually, yeah, this does make a lot of sense rather than just being well, we've got these guys on millions of pounds a year, and you want us to spend more money on them. It's yeah, I mean that is what I'm trying to say, but it's also saying, well, this is why as a club you should really care about this rather than it just being like I'm not trying to make it into a charity. So I think it's more down to the club and how they see things and have they looked into this area properly. But I don't find many clubs that when I speak to them, they go, well, I think you've got it completely wrong. I think they might have a difference of opinion and approach or resource, but rarely do I get clubs who go, nah, you're way off it. So I think it's just trying to get, a different way of thinking into people and seeing where we go from there.
Brilliant. And again, I think player care, you instantly think this is to help people settle, but I'm assuming it's much broader. So could you give us a kind of brief overview of what exactly goes into player care?
Yeah, I mean, we talk about three stages of a player's journey at a club. So you have the onboarding period, which is, as what you've said, is the onboarding of a player, very very literally, but it's kind of trying to get them set up and settle them and their family as quickly as possible. You have then the ongoing period, which is kind of the long period where it could be, if you're Mark Noble or something, it could be 15 years. If you're on loan for a half a season, it could be 3 or 4 months. But the ongoing period is kind of when you've got everything you need, but it might be reacting to a couple of problems that come up, or it might be a bit of education or a bit of life skills. And then the offboarding is when the player's, leaving either to retire or to leave to another club, and you're trying to help them transition out of the club, out of the industry. And so, there's a wide variety of things that every player is different, and even nationalities, there's kind of a thing, well, Dutch players like this or French players like this, but everyone's different, even within that. So you have some similarities, but a 21-year-old player with no partner and kids is going to be very different to the 35-year-old who's got 3 kids, maybe 8, 9 years old. So it's just trying to be proactive, and I keep saying that, but it's about trying to get ahead of the issues that might come up by having sort of solutions or pathways to solving them, but then also reacting in an appropriate and a professional way, and also a personable way to solve any problems that come up and try and limit their stress and stop them sort of being distracted on the pitch by stuff that's happening off the pitch as much as possible.
Yeah. Okay. Brilliant. And in terms of where I guess player care fits in, it sounds like it's a role that fits pretty much across the club, but where would it fit, I guess, in a structure of a club?
Every club is so different. So, a lot of clubs you kind of report into the club secretary. It's kind of seen as like a traditionally an admin based role. But what again I'm trying to get clubs to do is see it less of like a service like it used to be, and more as an actual like helping to make the decisions at the top table. And so, trying to get clubs to say, when we're deciding scheduling or contracts or whatever, to go, let's hear about this person as a this individual as a person, and say, well, look, what do you know about him as someone who spends a lot of time with them personally, and you can kind of tie into that. But again, it's little things where when player care is well integrated into a club, it just everything works more harmoniously. And a good example of that was when I was working at one of my clubs, the manager changed the day off for the players from I think it was Tuesday to a Wednesday, and I said to him, just so you know, they've got a team dinner on Tuesday night. It's all organised. They're all like all the partners are coming, and actually, if we're now in on Wednesday, then it kind of ruins it a little bit. And he was like, "Oh my goodness, I didn't know." And he just done it. I think it was something like I think he had an event that he had to go to or something like that. And he was like, "Oh God, no! Of course, the more important thing is the team dinner." But actually, like having been what might have happened if we weren't if we'd been less integrated, that person never would have said, "Oh, this is actually the impact it's going to have on team bonding." But if I was more integrated, it probably would have been, or actually, when we're looking at, okay, we're thinking of changing schedule. Oh, just so you know, they've got this, so then it would have avoided all the sort of drama of, oh my God, we're going to have to cancel the dinner. I hate this, whatever. So it's just trying to be again like integrated with it, so that we're not saying that we're telling the manager who to pick or anything like that, but giving them all the information they need to be able to make the most informed decision. It seems for me a kind of a blind point to have decisions made on people without a lot of their life being sort of fed into it in some way, even if it's a weekly catch up or a monthly catch up, to not have any input in that, which is often what happens at clubs. It feels like a blind spot really for a lot of managers and people making the sporting decisions.
Yeah, and obviously you've been in it for 9, coming on 10 years now. So how has it changed just in that short period? But you're pretty much at the forefront of this. So how has it changed in the last decade?
Yeah, I think you've gone from kind of a single individual like the old player liaison, who tended to be, I think respectfully, sort of a older bloke who was kind of around the club, maybe a fan or someone who kind of, was there just to fix problems for players very sort of superficially, to now a department of multi-skilled people. So you might have someone who's a linguist, you might have someone who's more operationally focused, you might have someone who's more mental health focused, you might have someone who's a great administrator, you might have someone who's really good with families and young kids. And so I think now clubs are trying to say, well, look, what else can we do in this area, rather than just saying either we've got either players should get their agents to do it, that's the box ticked, or we'll just get one person and that's the box ticked. Or now it's like, okay, well, how do we actually really grow this? Because there's so much happening on the data side and the performance side and the nutrition and all of these other things. Well, actually, that's great for the 5 hours a day they're at the training ground, but there's 19 hours a day they're not there. So what are we doing on there? Are we doing the best we can for there, and how is that impacting things? So yeah, I think it's changed a lot in terms of the numbers of staffing, but it probably hasn't moved on that much either in terms of the way things are actually done, and that's a bit of a shame. But yeah, I think there are people doing great work in a lot of different clubs and trying to learn from each other and support each other. Because in my way of thinking is that this isn't a scarce resource. Like clubs don't need to be rivals in terms of player care. Like if we look after a player really well, doesn't mean that another club can't do it. There's not only a certain amount of care in the world. So if we can have a collaborative approach, and if a German player signs for Brentford, well, what German players are at Chelsea or Fulham that actually they can go and help each other and support each other because they come from have a shared language or a shared background. So that for me is a really basic thing. But then fans might go, well, why is he hanging out with a Fulham player or a Chelsea player? They're rivals, yeah, but they're not. The clubs are rivals, but the players, didn't grow up in this country. So
Yeah.
I think it's just trying to have that sort of wider approach to it. I think really helps, and most clubs are pretty good at that as well, which is good.
So you're talking about players from different clubs being seen out. Do people, the everyday fan, forget that they're humans trying to settle in a new country?
Yeah, I think they do. I think, well, no, actually, I don't know. Sometimes they do, sometimes they don't. And I think it's this understanding that, like, I see it on social media a lot where, you'll lose 5-0 and then the players will have a day off the next day, or there'll be a bit of content that comes out on the club's channels. And the fans are like, well, they should be training, they should be working hard. Well, if you've ever had a bad day at work, I know the last thing I want to do is do more work. I just say, right, I'm going to switch off tonight. I'm going to watch a film, have a glass of wine, go for dinner, whatever it is. I'm not like, what would be really great is doing more player care group emails or doing more football stuff. I want to completely detach myself. And that, I think people forget that. And yes, they are well paid, but also they're people who need a break. And, the summer breaks are becoming shorter and shorter, and the international breaks are becoming more and more packed. And it's really just like, I think it just becomes there's just a relentless drive for more and more. And I'm not saying that it shouldn't happen, because I think the players and the staff are rewarded with more and more money because there's more and more money coming into the game. But I think just this understanding that actually, I think people forget there is a human being in there, often quite a young human being, quite a possibly uneducated person who's living away from their family, living in a foreign environment that they're not necessarily comfortable in, and so to expect people to just perform consistently and constantly is pretty really hard, and also that people might need a break or might need some space or whatever. And I think um, I've been out to dinner and I've seen people taking pictures across the restaurants, like secret ones, or hovering, or just and it's like I'm not going to say you shouldn't do it, because fans can do what they want, but I think it's just that understanding that actually, like, to feel like you're being watched is really uncomfortable, and it makes people unsettled, and all of that as well. And people want shirts after every game, and they want this and they want that, and actually, like, if you had a plumber come around your house and you said, oh, actually, can you leave me your plunger?
Hmm.
They'd be like, well, no, that's my tool to work. And you're like, yeah, but it's for my son. He's a huge fan of plumbing. And you'd be like, well, go buy him buy him a plunger. So, and again, it's nice for players to be able to do nice things, but I think that relentless expectation of give me, give me, give me, give me, I think it gets quite tiring as well. So, these are first world problems, you could argue, but actually I think it all goes into the whole feeling together of that it can be quite relentless. But are there harder jobs in the world? 100% there are. But what we're talking about is a entertainment, high performance environment where, as player care, we try and reduce that stress as much as possible.
Have you had any strange requests from players?
Hmm. I mean, yeah, I think you always get some that are like, you probably have to like, what were they asking? But and this is going to be a kind of a boring answer, I think, but I always try and put myself in their shoes. Like, just because it's weird for me doesn't mean it's necessarily weird for them. And so it might be a cultural thing, it might be, a background thing that I don't quite get or quite understand. But I think I've been not burnt, but I've definitely made a mistake a few times where I'm like, well, that's ridiculous. And then you actually dig into it and it's a religious thing or a cultural thing, or it's something that actually, when I think about it deeper, actually can be a big deal. And so, and that again, that's not the most exciting answer, but I think, yes, I've had some weird things. I've had a player want me to get the message I got was, can you get a hunter to come shoot? It was a peacock that was outside their house, and he was like, "I'm like, you want it what?" And he was like, basically, but what it turned out was that I can't remember his partner, his kids were like deathly afraid of birds, and the peacock would just sit and like tap on the window all the time, and he was getting really unsettled, and the wife was freaking out all the time, and all this, and like, so what he wanted was basically the bird scared away, which we got like an ultrasonic but pest scarer that was £5 on Amazon, and it did the trick. But by him asking for a hunter, I'm like picturing kind of a Steve Irwin with a rifle coming around in rural the New Forest. So again, I was like, well, that doesn't exist. But then when you actually dig into it, I'm like, okay, well, actually, it's a fair enough request, I guess. So yeah, I think rather than try and judge people, I try and take them on their value. But sometimes I have to be like, okay, that's just not, no, we're not doing that, or no, that's not appropriate, or no, that's not realistic. But I try and help as much as I can, but I'm also not just a pure yes man where, they snap their fingers at 2 a.m. and I'm making sandwiches and driving them across the country sort of thing. So yeah, it's about trying to get that balance right.
I was going to ask, what kind of hours do you work?
Well, I mean, now I'm a consultant, so I have the pleasure of telling other people how to do their job better rather than actually doing the job myself. So that my hours are a lot better than they used to be. But I think in reality, you're on call 24 hours a day in this job. And clubs, again, I'm trying to encourage clubs to have a bigger team so you can share that workload. But if a player gets burgled at 2 a.m. to say, well, I'm not working that day, it's not really good enough. You've got to be there, and in the crisis moments are the ones where it's really make or break with the relationship. And if you can be there through someone's really hard times, they'll support you back through the good times. So, I would say that I tend to, when I was in clubs, to have my phone on from 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. and then it would be on do not disturb the rest of the time. So for calls, they would come through, but other, messages, WhatsApps and stuff, and emails wouldn't come through. But obviously if it's 7:05, I'm not like, yeah, don't speak to me kind of thing, but trying to also build that there's clear barriers and that clear sort of lines of respect and lines in the sand where you say, actually, no, that's not appropriate to ask me for that at 4 a.m. or whatever. But knowing they have that safety net that if something really serious happens, you're available. But it is a relentless job, which is often for 11 months of the year, 6-7 days a week, 24 hours a day. And that's why I say to clubs, well, have a bigger department, because if that one person, it's too much for them, they leave, they get hit by a bus, you've got nothing. And so actually by having different people with different skills, you can share that workload and also reduce the risk on the club. So we're trying to get there with that, but easier said than done sometimes.
Yeah. What is the? I mean, it sounds like the background of the type of person that would be good for this kind of role is pretty much like a HR. Because is that right or not really? What would a typical background be?
Yeah, I mean, there isn't a typical, and that's why I like it so much. I think is there's really like it's a low barrier to entry in terms of if you look at the makeup of the player care staff in the Premier League. Like my team at West Ham, we had a languages degree who worked in a pub. We had an HR girl from Dyson, and then we had myself who had a business sort of coaching background. So like there was, and we got from Dyson had a music degree. So it was like there wasn't really a set like background. We've got former teachers, we've got ex-policemen, we've got ex-players, we've got ex-administrators, army. You know, like you can name it all. Really, there's probably been a player care person who's done it. And like for example, you know, I'm recruiting for a club for a junior role at a club at the moment, and we've not required football experience because for me it's about that personality. Are you a warm person who is empathetic but is, you know, not too caught up in the football that they can't be objective? Are you a problem solver? Are you warm? Do you maybe speak some languages? You know, and so that for me, it's probably one of the few points in football where you really can get in from any background. You don't have to have a long degree. You know, like my company, we teach courses, but they aren't a prerequisite. And I don't, while we try and help our graduates get jobs, I won't hire someone just because they've done the course, obviously. But actually, like you can do anything. And as long as you can do those translatable skills and show why you could add something from your life experiences, then you've got a chance in the job. And I think that's a really exciting place to be in where you can literally have the most different people applying for jobs and doing things very differently. And as I said at the beginning, like the way that clubs do things differently is because they've got different people running it. And so what I would teach at a club is very different to what other people might do at a club. And that's fine. That's difference of opinion. So yeah, I think there are so many different varieties of people, but as long as you're a good person who has good, strong morals and, you know, charismatic and a good problem solver, then you'll probably be okay.
Great stuff. And you touched upon West Ham there, but I'm a West Ham fan myself. And when I think back of the likes of, we had Marco Boogers that went to run off in a caravan, supposedly, allegedly. And then you had Javier Margas, I think it was, that jumped out of a hotel window to escape back to Chile. Long before, I'm assuming, the days of player care and player liaison. But I mean, would player care have made a difference, do you think, in those situations?
Yeah, I mean, I don't. I'm not old enough to know either of those players, thankfully. But no, I think there's also kind of these sort of folk stories get exaggerated. There was a great one about like Alan Gomez goldfish swimming the wrong way at Fulham, and I remember I asked Mark at Fulham, and he's like, "It just never happened. It's just not a true story." But it's one of those that always gets kind of pushed around. I mean, I remember when I was at West Ham. There was a story about Andy Carroll jumping out of a balcony or falling off a balcony on pre-season and injuring himself, and it went on like Lad Bible or one of those, and it got, you know, hundreds of thousands of likes, and it became like that's what happened. And I remember seeing it, and I was like, our hotel doesn't even have balconies. Like it just genuinely wasn't true. He did his foot in the warm up of one of the games, but because it was kind of like great, like clickbaity stuff, and I'm pretty sure I can't remember which site it was, but it was one of those kind of like Instagram aggregator things. And by the time the club had contacted them and got it taken it down, it didn't matter because no one was looking back at the feeds from 3 or 4 days ago. And I remember, like, you know, I'm in group chats with some of my mates who are football fans, and they were all talking about it, and I'm like, but it's just not true. And so, like, what's probably happened is something's happened and it's gone like this. And so, you know, really very rarely do you get these like wacky events. But yeah, probably it would be my job. You know, I was the guy responsible for picking Michael Antonio out after he drove a Lamborghini into someone's house on Christmas Day dressed as a snowman. And like,
I remember
that was
that.
true because I saw it and it was in the press and I was there and it happened. But like, that was my job. I got that call on Christmas Day and I went and picked him up. But like, you know, what really happened there? You know, like he was taking one of his cousins or something out in the car. He was dressed up because he'd been given permission to have Christmas Day with his family because they were South London, which was Crystal Palace away. He wasn't drinking. There was no crime committed. It was just he just lost control of the car and no one was hurt. So you know, it's one of those things that yes, you can either report that as man has minor vehicle accident, or he's driving around like Father Christmas, handing out presents and smashing into cars in South London. It's the same story, but it's promoted in two different ways. So I think that I would probably pay less stock into those things, though. Obviously, they make for great tales and stories and sound quite fun. But I think probably in reality, although I don't know either of those players or their situations, I'd maybe question it a little bit.
Fair enough. What happens then? Antonio would call you. Like, who contacts you in that situation, or is he on your speed dial?
Yeah, I mean, I was working for West Ham at the time. I was traveling with the team. Miguel called me and said, he'd been in an accident. We had a supplementary vehicle. We dispatched it to go and pick him up. I went down there with him. We got him checked by the medical team. He was not injured or concussed. That was the first. The first concern was that he was hurt. Well, the first concern that he was hurt someone else. The second concern that he was hurt. Neither of those two had happened. So then it was like, okay, well, get to the hotel. We'll pick, get. I think the insurance sorted the car in the end, and there was really like it was not really a story. And then I think 2 or 3 days later, the video came out of him climbing out dressed as I think it was a snowman,
Yeah,
and it was like, oh, that's a bit silly, but it was silly, but no one was hurt. He rebuilt the shed of the person who's that he I think it was like a bin store actually. He like drove through, and he paid for that, and it was a bit of fun and all of that, and it was fine. Obviously could have been terrible. It could have been a horrific incident, and it wasn't. So, yeah, he gave me a call, and we sorted it, and it wasn't as big a drama as it probably seemed from the outside, but
yeah.
sometimes sat on Christmas Day, you're like, what am I doing? I could be that, a couple of pigs in blankets down here, and instead I'm on the side of a building estate in Croydon picking a snowman up. But it kind of is what it is, really. So yeah.
Yeah. I can imagine you're going to have a lot of fun stories when you get to the end of your career like this.
Yeah, I think when I want to burn all my bridges, I'll write a book or something. But until now, it's all staying close to my chest.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And I get just a question on the player care, because again, I think from a fan's point of view, I would probably expect that if there's any unhappiness or wellness from a player, he would typically talk to his agent, who would then talk to the club. So where is that kind of fine line between you and an agent?
Yeah, I mean, the player would probably speak to us primarily, I would think, because we're there every day. We're in the club. We travel with the players. We travel to away games. We're at home games. We're at the training ground every day. So we tend to be the first port of call, depending on the incident and the issue at hand. Um, Agents, I would say, we kind of work in parallel rather than together. Some agents want to get really involved in the housing stuff, and I prefer it when they don't, because we tend to be experts in relocations, and they're like, I wouldn't tell them how to negotiate the contract, so I let them. We prefer they let us to do the onboarding. A lot of agents are quite happy to let us do that work. But yeah, I mean, I'd say if there was an incident, or something we're struggling with, I might reach out to the agent, but I don't have a hugely engaging relationship with most agents. You do the deal, you probably never see most of them ever again. So, yeah, I'm fairly happy with it being that way, to be honest. But different agent, every agent's different. But we tend to deal. You say to the club, look, we'll deal with everything sort of day to day around the club, around the player here, and you can deal with their career, you can deal with their contract, you can deal with stuff, maybe in their home country a little bit more. But yeah, I think you tend to kind of step on each other's toes a little bit if it's not quite clearly set out at the beginning. But yeah, I think we have different roles. Ultimately, the agent's more interested in the player as an individual, whereas we're more trying to get the team together. But also then, the agent makes money off a player moving, whereas we don't. So we're probably more invested in the long term, retention of that player, whereas the agent probably makes more money if the player moves from club to club. So slightly different approaches, I would say, but I don't have bad relationships with any agents. It's just more I don't have hugely, and we don't really rely on each other day to day, to be honest.
Fair enough. Fair enough. And does the player care extend to youth team players, or is it more ring fenced for first team?
Yeah, I mean, we have academy player care staff, so that would be much more focused on education, life skills, parental relationships. Especially for the really young players, the sort of the under eights and that. But then it's a different sort of style in the first team. But yeah, everyone has player care within a club as long as they have that role. But yeah, it looks very different, even though it's the same sort of the same name of something. But yeah, it's focused much more on educating them, because a lot of them won't make it as footballers. So trying to really grow them as people and give them options away from football. And then if they make it, then great, they've still got those life skills. Whereas in the first team, it's probably more about sort of short-term solving of problems, happy to help them, educate them and show them how to do things. But actually, it's more about trying to keep them focused on the pitch, whereas the academy is more about that long-term future, I guess.
Yeah, fair enough. And I think you touched upon this earlier, just in terms of other nations being, having player care as well. Is England at the forefront of player care? Would you say, or are we behind other nations?
Yeah, I think the English league is it tends to be where the most money is, so it's where probably they do a good job of this. Don't think anywhere does it amazingly well. I think we're all on this like long journey of trying to work out exactly what it is. So I think we're better than a lot of our European counterparts. There are other sports who do probably better work on less money. So I know that certainly I try and understand what they're doing in different sports. Rugby's a specifically good one, but actually every sport is so different. Every culture is different. So what works in London might not work in Mexico or might not work in Saudi Arabia or whatever it is. So it's really trying to make sure that um, obviously my clients work, try and push themselves as best they can and find the best solution for themselves. But yeah, I think where we're at now is still not a very advanced stage overall, but England is definitely ahead of the other sort of major European leagues.
Yeah, I guess then if you're somebody looking to get into player care as a profession, probably a very good time to do it, because it is very hard to break into football. It's everybody's dream job. So how would somebody get into that? I know you said you'd look at all backgrounds, but if you're a listener, you're listening to this show now, what would you advise someone how to get into it?
Well, I mean, the easy answer I'd say is do the player care groups course because that's a great way to get in. But in reality, we've had, I think, 80 of our graduates work in full time football out of about 250. So while we don't guarantee it, actually had some good success with that. But I think for me, like, go and get some life skills. When we get 19, 20 year olds coming to me and saying, want to work in player care, and I'm like, yeah, but you're potentially 18 years younger than your oldest player. What advice, what life skills can you give them? And so even if it's, I've got one of my graduates who was working at Domino's Pizza and now he works at a league club as I think, yeah, he's in a fairly senior role. So, you know, it's not about necessarily you have to have this, you have to have that. It's about going out, getting life experience, showing how you support players, and networking is really important. Like, you can be the best person in the world, but if no one knows you and no one knows to look at your CV or your credentials, then you're probably not going to struggle. So, having run them in the past and currently running recruitment things, you know, getting hundreds, if not thousands, of applicants.
Yeah.
So you really have to stand out or be a name that people recognize or whatever it is. So anything you can do to try and put yourself in the shop window is great, but be unique, stand out, back yourself, but be humble enough to know that you need to learn stuff. But yeah, have some life experience. Go live somewhere else. Go volunteer somewhere. Go, get a job in retail because actually, you're dealing with difficult people every day. Very good sort of setup for player care. So, though it might not sound like working at, B&Q might be a really good segue into football, it's better than doing nothing. So, I think really just try and build those life experiences, build your network as much as possible, and get stuck in and move anywhere in the world as well. The other thing I'd say is if you can speak the language and live there legally, then take a risk, especially when you're young, and go and my first professional job was in Indiana. Didn't want to live in Indiana. It was not my first choice of location, but you know what? It was a great experience with a startup team, and I wouldn't be where I am now had I not gone and done that year out in the second division in America. So, yeah, I think probably those are the things I would push people towards.
Excellent. And do you, personally, as in the player care group, do you consult globally, or is it just in the UK at the moment?
Yeah, so we all of our services are available worldwide. Obviously, primarily in England because that's where I'm based. But the course, I think we've had 25 different nations, people from 25 different nations sign up, and we're getting more and more clubs setting their staff on develop their staff. So people existingly working in player care are joining the course from around the world, which is great. And then the consulting, yeah, we have clients around the world, and yeah, we're just trying to, we'll just work with good people who have good, understand this and want to get better at it. And we're happy to help everyone. Yeah.
Excellent. Hugo, and if clubs or students wanted to get in touch with player care group or yourself, what's the best way to do that?
Yeah, I mean, our website's playercaregroup.co.uk. Have a look through there. We've got some great resources, articles to read, and get in touch through the website or at Player Care Group, Instagram, Twitter, or X, I think it's called now, LinkedIn, probably the most active for both myself and the company. So, Hugo Scheckter, LinkedIn, Player Care Group, the Player Care Group on LinkedIn. So, yeah, that's us really.
Excellent. Hugo, that's been really insightful. I do appreciate your time. I think there's a lot of things that people can learn there. So thanks very much for coming on the show.
No worries. Thanks for having me.
Cheers.